Sometimes we're good, but life does turn in different directions all the time. So that's how we're going to start this story. When Matt first asked me if I wanted to tell my life story, I thought, why would I do that? Why would I come in front of people and let them know all the things, the mistakes that I made, all the good choices I made? And I've learned one thing through this all, that when I made the turn that God led me to do, everything was good. Everything turned out fine. But when I tried to do it on my own, I took a turn that I wanted to do. Usually didn't turn out so well. So I guess this will be my story, that when I let God lead, I was blessed. When I did not, I was not blessed. So Brenda's going to help me. She's going to kind of keep me on track, because sometimes I can lose track of what I want to say. Anyway, so why did you turn my pages over? Oh, yes, this is the actual verse from Ecclesiastes. That there's a time for everything. For everything there is a season. There's a time for activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What do people really get for all their hard work? I have seen the burden God has placed on us. Yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So I conclude there is nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. So my story begins with my youth. I grew up in Grand Rapids in a Catholic household. I went to elementary school at a Catholic grade school. I went to high school at Catholic Central High School in Grand Rapids. So my upbringing was in the Catholic Church.
When were you born?
Born in 1951. My mother was a kind of a strange mix of cultures in our family. My father was Christian Reformed, was born or raised a Christian Reformed Dutch person, and my mother was Polish Catholic. And at that time, in order for the two to marry, my father actually had to convert to Catholicism because the church would not acknowledge a marriage between two people that weren't both Catholic. So he actually went to school, he had to study. I mean, this is what my mom told me, and actually convert to Catholicism before they could get married. But he did it, and so they actually were able to get married. And so I had 5 brothers. 3 were older than me, 2 were younger than me, so I was kind of in the middle. So I think I should talk about my dad first. He was he fought in World War II. He was actually in the a sergeant in the 1st Airborne Infantry, 101st Airborne Infantry. So when you see the gliders at Myers, he was one of the soldiers that jumped out of the gliders, and they were sent behind German lines to, so that there was a double front, so that they had troops actually behind and in front when they attacked. He didn't talk about the war very much. He was actually decorated. He won a Silver Star. But when we spent time together, and I'd ask him a question just out of the blue, he just didn't want to really talk about it. I think it brought back too many bad memories. I remember once he told me, when I did ask him, he said, "There's really nothing honorable about war. There's something you never want to do. There's things you will do and things you will see that you'll never want to remember." So even though he was, decorated, he actually went on some radio program where they had, he had some notoriety about his position in the war, but he never wanted to talk about it or accept it. So he was really important in my life. He was kind of my strength when I was younger. Of all my brothers, he would usually ask me to do things with him. He would come to me, especially like go fishing or go in the hardware store. He would come and seek me out and ask me to go. And it seemed to me like he would do that more than he did for my older brothers. And I always thought that was special. But looking back in my life, I wondered now if he didn't do it because maybe he thought I needed it more than my other brothers. That maybe he saw something in me that he needed to fill, and so he was really trying to help me out, and I don't know what that was, but so anyway, when I was in 6th grade, 12 years old, he passed away. It was a sudden thing. I didn't even know he was sick, and it turns out he had stomach cancer, and back then, when you were that young, I remember the ambulance came to the house and they took him away, and I never saw him after that. They wouldn't let us. We could go to the hospital, but we couldn't actually go in and see him. So it was really hard that I never got to say goodbye. I never got to see him after that point. I just remember him leaving. We had a 2-story house back then, and they took the stretcher upstairs, and I remember they tried to get him to lay down, but he was so proud he wouldn't lay down. He wanted to sit up while they carried him outside. So it was that's my last vision of him leaving the house. Instead of laying down in the stretcher they're carrying him, he was actually sitting up. So tough time for me. I remember that. Of course, being a Catholic and being in school, we had a lot of nuns and priests, and you were always told that if you prayed for something, God would answer your prayer, that He would always be there for you. And I remember staying up at night praying that my dad would come home from the hospital and be okay. For night after night, because he was probably in the hospital for a couple of weeks before he passed away, and God never answered my prayer, and I was angry. I said, why can't you bring my dad home? I really need him. And he didn't, so it was really a turning point in my life, because then I kind of separated myself from God. I didn't think He cared anymore, and I actually, even though I went to school and I went to mass because it was an obligation you had, I never really connected with God at that time, because I was angry. I was so mad because He had taken something special away from me, and I was angry with Him. And so even though I did go to church, and I did say the prayers, and I never meant any of that. So that was the early part of my life. Like I said, went to the Catholic Central, played football, went through all the things. I had an older brother that was 3 years ahead of me, named Larry, and he was also a football player, and he was good. He got a scholarship to the U of M. So I kind of looked up to him, so I wanted to follow in his footsteps. So I played football too. I wasn't nearly as good as he was, but I was a starter, so so I enjoyed that. So on to the next portion of my life.
Do you want to talk about your mom?
What about it?
Mom being a single mom.
Oh, yes. Of course, when my father died, my mother had never gone to work before. Of course, now she's in a position where she has all us boys at home, and so she has to go out and find a job and have some income into the family. I know our house was paid for because luckily my father had bought mortgage life insurance, so we did have a place to live. But of course, she's got to feed, she's got to feed 5 or 6 boys at home. How much they can eat. If it's anything like Nicholas, I'm sure we emptied the refrigerator every day or two.
When his father passed away, his mom was pregnant, so she had a baby after he died.
Oh, true. Yeah, my brother
they're-
Michael. Was
So they're at home, just the 3 of these guys.
Yes, thank you. So anyway, back to Larry Larry was, like I said, a football player. He didn't get a football player. He didn't make the team and get a full scholarship, so he applied for what's called an Evans Scholar. Blythefield Country Club in Grand Rapids every year awards one young man a scholarship to a university where they have a fraternity house, and they pay for everything. They pay for your tuition, your room and board, everything but food. So they award that every year. So following my brother Larry, I caddied at Blythefield. I worked in the pro shop for a couple of years. I applied for the scholarship and I got it. You stand in front of they have a board out there and you have to answer some questions, and there's maybe half a dozen applicants every year. So yes, I won the scholarship. So I was going to go to Ann Arbor and be a Wolverine. So I did win the scholarship, but then another bad turn of my life. I went to the U of M, and first time away from home.
Always a bad idea. Bad idea.
First time away from home, living in a fraternity house, and college is much different than high school. If anybody's ever done that, I went from a high school where the nuns and your teachers, there were some lay teachers when I went to school, but we still had a lot of nuns at Catholic Central, really cared for you, and guided you on your way through your studies, and if you had problems, they were easy to answer. You go to a major university like that, and I found that professors don't care so much about individual students. You ask for, just saying this because my grade point pummeled. I went from being a straight A student in high school to retain this scholarship at Evans. You had to maintain a 2.0 average all the time. And in 6 months, mine was 1.8 because I got caught up in the parties. There were parties every night somewhere. We lived in a group of fraternity houses. So every night there was something to do. So, a couple of my roommates would run in there and say, "Oh, we got to go over here and go to this party. It's really cool." And so I got caught up in all that. And needless to say, a major university like that, it's easy to stumble, and I did. So after 6 months, I lost my scholarship, and then that was like I said, another major time in my life when I really failed and I really felt bad. So from that, moved back to Kalamazoo. My mother had remarried, and they lived in Portage, which is just outside of Kalamazoo. So I moved back home and was able to get into Western, and I got my bachelor's degree there. So when I got my bachelor's degree, of course, you had to go to graduate school.
Wait, you should probably back up.
What's that?
You should back up.
Oh. I wanted to talk about the draft a little bit. Well, that's be about the same time. This was during the Vietnam War. It was, you're talking 1971, early 70s when I was in school. I graduated high school in 69, so yes, I was in the height of the Vietnam War. And of course, I don't know if anybody remembers the draft lottery where every birthday, they picked numbers out of a hat, and if they picked April 1st, number 1, you were the first one to go, and it went all the way to 365. So I was pretty fortunate. I got a high number, 286, I remember. So I was pretty safe I thought I was pretty safe, but still. I was in school, and I was paying my own way, and in one semester I didn't have enough money for tuition. I don't know why I fell short, but I couldn't go to school, so I thought I'd drop out for a semester, earn some money, and then reapply and get back in school. Boy, as soon as I lost my deferment, I got the letter from the president telling me I had to, go to the bus station and they would take me to Detroit for my physical, which was a real experience. I don't know if any of you have ever been in that situation, but it showed me at that time that I really didn't want anything to do with the military. I certainly didn't want to be in the Army. I mean, it was very degrading what they, how they treated you and what they did at the time. I won't go into too much detail, but I just remember riding that bus to Detroit, walking into this cold warehouse building, and hundreds of other young men with me, and like I said, they they didn't treat you very respectfully, or and I thought, man, I don't want anything to do with this. So as soon as I could get back into school, I did, and then I got my deferment back. So the Vietnam War was not, I wasn't for my age group back then. It was a big thing. A lot of people got very adamant about being against the war, couldn't understand why we were there, and I felt the same way. I just thought that it's got nothing to do with me, and I don't want anything to do with going into the Army. So, and yet I had a younger brother, 2 years younger than I, Joel, that he actually enlisted. He wanted to follow in my father's footsteps. He thought he could become a war hero too. And the funny thing is, it didn't turn out the way he thought. I remember when he got back from boot camp, he came back and he asked me if I would drive him to Canada because he didn't want to stay in. But I did not. I convinced him to serve his 3 years, and he did. He actually had a small time in Vietnam, but he was in communications, and he didn't stay there very long, which he was pretty lucky. He actually got stationed in Germany after that, and he told me that was actually kind of nice. Germany was a good place to be, during the war. You're always on standby, but he never had to go back again. So,
what was your relationship like with your two younger brothers?
I was really close to Joel. We were almost inseparable growing up. And Mike, I took care of him as a baby. My mom was working, so I had to actually be a stay-at-home mom. I had to changing diapers and feed my younger brother. Kind of tough for, somebody 13, 14 years old having to, when I think back now, it was a big responsibility to. My mom had to go to work, and she didn't want to pay for somebody to watch him, so it would be up to me when I got home from school to take care of the household, to change diapers and make sure my brothers got fed. My older brothers one was in seminary, one had gotten married, and my my brother Larry had a job, so he was gone most of the time when I was home. So it was pretty much up to me to take care of my two younger brothers while Mom was at work. So kind of made me grow up really fast. Probably today why I do this at home now, that I kind of try to take care of the house, and I think it's just something that was inbred in me because of that situation.
I think you can move on to your mom.
We got some notes here, so I have to keep track of what. So anyway, like I said, my mother had remarried. Her new husband had 5 kids of his own, 2 boys and 3 girls. So we had this, really big house in Portage. So I actually, when I went back to Kalamazoo to go to school, I lived at home, and I was gone a lot because I worked. Whenever I wasn't in school, I seemed to be working. He had a painting business, and I actually painted for him, and we did a lot of He did a lot of large apartment complexes and stuff like that. So you could work all hours of the day. There was no restriction on when you could go in, because there were no residents or no people. Everything was brand new. So I could work whatever hours I wanted, and I did so that I could continue on in school and buy a car. One of my dream cars was a Shelby Mustang, and I remember I worked hard for like 2 years, and I finally was able to have enough money. It wasn't brand new; it was actually a year old, but I was able to buy my dream car, 1970 GT 500 Shelby. It was midnight blue with black striping, midnight blue with white striping, and it was my pride and joy for many years. So, but I could have gotten in big trouble because that thing was way too fast for me. Anyway, so I graduated from college with my bachelor's degree, and I was in aeronautical engineering, so I had to go to graduate school, of course, to get my degree and finish up. And I actually got a offer from GM to go to California to go to school. They would pay for my tuition. I had to sign an agreement that after school I would work for them for a minimum of 10 years. So there was another turn in my life here because I had a choice to make. I had met a young lady, a friend of one of my stepsisters, and we had a relationship, and I thought I was in love, and I was in love probably at that time, and she couldn't go to California with me, so my decision was, what did I do? Do I go to California and leave this all behind, or do I stay here and marry this girl that I was in love with? And of course I made the decision to stay here, so I did. Didn't go to California. I actually took a job as a supervisor for my stepfather. His painting company he probably had 30 employees, and he's worked all over the state. Not so many homes, but just big commercial stuff, and all different facets of what you would do. So he offered me a job to run a crew of men for him, and I did. A lot of them were much older than me, so it was kind of a strange situation that I was in charge of people 20 or 30 years older than I was. So I got married. Debbie was my first wife. Her father was named Victor Berglund, and he was a very renowned doctor in the Kalamazoo area. So she came from a wealthy family. Had lots of money anyway, because he would take us skiing up north all the time, and vacation. We actually went out west once, and he would pay for all of it. So he had spoiled her, and he tried to spoil me too. Boy, there's so many things I'm forgetting about. See, these memories that I'm going through are, you got to remember they're more than 50 years ago, so it's really hard to place all the things together in a fine order. But one of the other turns and regrets of my life is that Debbie got pregnant, and her dad had a lot to do with Planned Parenthood, and so he sat us down and he said, he pretty much convinced us that we were too young to have a child, and that he would...
Were you married yet?
What's that?
Were you married?
Yes, we were married. No, not yet. We were not married yet. We had planned to get married, and actually had, set in a date, but she got pregnant, and so my regret is that I allowed the abortion to go through. I actually drove her to the clinic and waited, while she had the procedure done. And looking back on my life, that I went against everything I totally believed in, yet I had let myself be led to think it was the right choice. And looking back, I realized it was a big mistake. But you can't change it now, so I don't, So a turn on that, like I said, it was a bad turn. And at this time, like I said, had no relationship with God. I had stopped that, when my father died, and, even at this point in my life, I had never, I didn't pray, I didn't go to church, and so I think that's what, since I was separated, I was trying to make all the choices of my life by myself, and a lot of times it didn't turn out very well. So anyway, so I married Debbie. Relationship probably lasted 4 or 5 years, and then we kind of grew apart, and she decided one day that she said, I don't want to be married anymore, and so we separated and got divorced. So that's a turn in my life where I've always believed in all the relationships I had that, they should be forever. I was never the one to initiate the, separation, but as you'll see as my story goes, that I guess I'm not very good at recognizing when problems are arising, because I don't see them until it's too late or until it's the end. So anyway, Brenda has this column of the women in my life. So Debbie was, it sounds worse than it is. Because to me it seems like somebody else's life. When I look back, I don't think this isn't really me, that, this is somebody else that, I'm a different person, like I separated from that other person, and I am who I am now, and it's just hard to look back and, remember all these things. But anyway. So anyway, we got divorced. We lived in Grand Rapids at the time, because most of what I did was up in this area, even though our business was in Kalamazoo. I lived up here because it was closer I didn't have to drive that hour every day back and forth. And I would take care of all the projects up here. So we had bought a house, and still working on these apartment projects. And I met the second woman of my life. Her name was Diana. She had a cleaning company that they would come in and clean these apartments after the construction was done, so that they were ready for the tenants to move in. And just started out with us having lunch together, because I always brought my lunch. I never went out, So I'd be sitting out there, and she'd come and talk to me. And it turns out, she was a single mother of 2 boys, and that started, my second relationship with women in my life. And we went out and, dated for a year or so, and then we finally got married. So all of a sudden I had 2 little boys in my life. One was Michael and one was Eddie, and they, coming from a family where she actually grew up and lived in Delaware, and she moved to Michigan to get away from a bad relationship with her husband. So the little boys had some emotional issues. Eddie was the oldest boy. Kind of funny, because that's what was my father's name was Edward, and his name was Eddie. So he just had a lot of insecurity, and I tried to help him through all that. And Michael was a good little boy, and he was really cool. So anyway, I had this, sudden going from not having any kids in my life to taking care of a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. So, but looking back, that was a good part of my life, and I wonder if God didn't put me there because maybe those 2 boys needed some help, and they did. And I tried to build up their self-esteem and tried to make them feel important. So, but there again, there was no God in this relationship. There was no, none of these women that I met had anything to do with church. They weren't raised in church. They had no religious background, so we didn't go to church together. Our family wasn't at that time, wasn't connected to any kind of relationship with God. And looking back, I think that's probably why these things that failed for me, because I didn't put God at the center of these relationships. I just tried to live life and by myself, and I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I have made that I made. That I spent a lot of years separated from God and not acknowledging Him and not relying on Him for choices that I would make. And I think we all have to understand that when we do that, that He doesn't punish us, but He lets us go our own way and make some mistakes, and a lot of times it hurts. So in the same vein, this marriage lasted 4 or 5 years, and then we just grew apart, and one day, same thing happened. She just said, I met somebody else, and, I want a divorce, and this was over with. And once again, I was devastated, but I let it happen. So that marriage dissolved, and I still tried to keep a relationship with the 2 boys because I thought, but now they had another man in their life, so maybe they didn't mean me so much. So here again, I'm on my own, and I don't know. I just always felt that I always believed that the story of the perfect family. You have a wife, you raise kids, and that's what life was supposed to be like. So maybe I was striving for that. Anyway, so I'm on my own for a couple more years. Still working at the same job. And I met another woman now. So this is like 2 years go by, and we go up. A couple friends of mine started this tradition of going up north golfing. We'd go up to the Petoskey, Traverse City area, all the different courses. If you're a golfer and you know anything about golf courses up north, there's some pretty fine, spectacular places to play golf. And so we started this tradition. There were 3 of us, or 4 of us, I'm sorry, that would go up, and we would spend the weekend, Thursday through Sunday, just golfing and whatever else, getting away from home. So on one of these trips, we went out to a nightclub or something like that after the golf was done, and of course it was in Gaylord, and it was kind of a wild situation. What's that? Anyway, so I met this another woman named Viva, and I was thought I was in love again, and there again she had children, a single mother again. She had a boy and 2 girls, and so we had this relationship, and at the time. I had a home in Cedar Springs that I had bought. I lived with my mother because it's this long story, but she had had a condominium that she had bought in Kentwood, and she wasn't happy there. So we found this fabulous home in Cedar Springs that was it was an amazing place. But I didn't have enough money on my own to buy it, and so I asked her, "How about we buy this house together?" And then I said, with both of our incomes, and the money that she had, I said we could afford to live and buy this place. And I said it was really, I don't know how to explain it, but the gentleman that built it all by himself. He lumbered. He had. Don't talk about it. Yeah.
If they have questions about the house, see them later.
Anyway, so that's how, and so Viva and I got married, and then she moved in with us there with her children, and it was not a good situation because, my mother wasn't ready for another move-in family to come and live with her. So this is how I ended up in Greenville, because, then I went out to look for a new house. We actually moved. I found a house on Orange Street, the yellow colonial house that, Pastor Matt used to live across the street from it. So we moved into that house when I bought that, and so there. And like I said, now I had children again. I had Amanda, Jeremiah, and Desdemona were her children's name. And I really grew close to them. They were really, they were good kids, and I really loved them very much. And that marriage lasted about the same time. It seems like I had this 4 or 5 year lifespan of marriages, and then things would happen, and I guess it's, I guess maybe my choice of women might not have been good, but I can't blame it all on them. Some might have been mine. I thought if I went to work every day and I provided, food and a place to live, and that was my main goal, and maybe I didn't work on the relationships as hard as I should have. Maybe it was partly my fault, but there again, this marriage didn't last, 4 or 5 years, and we grew apart, and divorce came about, so except for Brenda, those are the women in my life. I know it seems, like a lot, and my friends who know about that, still kid me about it, I remember after the last one, I was with my mom, and she said, when are you going to learn you can't be the knight on on a white horse with shining armor, rescuing all these single women that are, have problems in their life, and you think you can rush in there and save them all, and, so maybe that's what I was trying to do. I thought that I could save the world or whatever. So anyway, so then I bought the house. We had bought the house on Orange Street. Viva was from Waterford, which is by Detroit, and she decided to move back home. And so that left me with this big house all by myself. And so I lived there for a couple of years. And at that time, I was done with relationships. I wasn't going out. I wasn't looking for, I was done with women. I said, no more of this. There's too much heartache, and there's too much, you give and give, and, all of a sudden, your life is destroyed for a while, and it just isn't worth it. And so I said, no more. I'm not going to, I'll live by myself, and I don't know what I was going to do with that big house, but anyway, I lived there, and suddenly one day, I had 2 neighbors next door, Pam and Lori, who lived, in the house next to mine, and their house went up for sale, and I remember one day I came home from work, and here comes this beautiful young lady walking up to me, introducing herself as my new next door neighbor, and here she is. She looks the same now as she did back then. And what was funny is the house had some issues in it on the flooring. I guess their dog, the previous owner's dog, had wet on the floor, so she had this hardwood flooring.
We had
and
carpeting from 1971. This is 1997 we're talking.
And she was asking me questions about how to repair this floor. And I tried to answer her questions. I went and looked at it and told her what could be done. And at that time, I had the impression that she was engaged to be married for some. I don't know where I got that idea, but that she was engaged to be married by somebody. And I remember going over there, helping her tear out some of this hardwood flooring and replacing it. And I'm wondering, where is this guy that she's engaged to be married to? And I don't know how I ever got that impression, but so anyway, I finally found out. I think I asked her, and she told me her husband had passed away, that he had gotten sick, and I realized she was single, and I don't know, I think I asked her, finally asked her, I got up the courage to ask her to go out sometime. And she said, well, instead of going out, why don't you come to church with me? This was a big turning point in my life, another big turn, because I hadn't been to church in years. And instead of going out on a date, she's asked, go to church on a Sunday. I remember it was funny because I had a golf date that, supposed to be golf with some friends of mine. And I gave up, I called and told him, you got to get somebody else. I can't come golf today because I'm going to church. And the guy on the phone was just kind of quiet, like, really, you're going to church and you're not going to golf? So which was a big thing for me, because golf was one of my passions. And so I picked Brenda up and we come here to this church. And this is the start of my relationship with God. Because I came here and Dave Perry was the pastor, of course, and I just remember coming in here and realizing the first day what I had missed, because just the worship service, probably not quite as good as what we have now, but still it was amazing to me. All these people were singing, they were excited about God, and I'm thinking, man, why have I missed this all my, I've spent, 30 years of my life not doing any of this, and how good it felt to leave this building and feel, that feeling that getting close to God gives you. And so big turning point that, that first day, that first time coming here and feeling the way I did when I left, I realized what I had missed all these years. By separating myself, all the things I'd given up, looking for all the things in life that I thought would fulfill it, and I didn't. I just had separated myself. So coming back here with Brenda was like a huge turning point. And so we kept coming to church. We came every Sunday for, and find, what are we? No. I guess she wants me to talk about my, I get off track, that's why she's up here. I don't think this is so important, but I had worked for 15 years for my stepfather, and he had promised me that I would, I don't know if you know what a job estimator is, but the daily labor of going in and doing, the things that we did. We did a lot of commercial buildings, so we did a lot of spray painting. Every day we would, we put out our masks, we put on our covers, and we go into these buildings, and everything was, how fast you could get it done, and we did a few homes, but not very many. So we did all this work, and after 15 years, I decided that maybe I'd try to do it on my own. I had met a few builders, through this company, and a couple of them had said, if you ever decide to start your own business, we'd like to, to hire you. So I decided after 15 years I had enough of working for somebody else doing a job that I really didn't like to do. So it wasn't so, that I didn't like it. It was just there's no appreciation, for your. You didn't get any. I don't know the word I'm looking for.
Not really. There's not really any job satisfaction.
Yeah, no satisfaction.
You could do a good job or a bad job, and nobody would.
Nobody cared. Yeah, it was only how fast you get it done. So I wanted something where I'm a very detailed person, so I wanted something where that would satisfy me. That when I got done with the day's work, I looked back at what I did, and it was something I could be proud of. And so I started my own business. I worked for a man named Phil Bishop first. He was based in Hastings, and he did a lot of work on the southeast side of Grand Rapids. So did a number of houses out there for him. I remember when I left my stepfather's company, he said, you're going to find out how hard it is to work for yourself. I think he was disappointed I was leaving, and he wanted me to stay because I did a pretty good job for him. And I think I was, he was going to miss what I had brought to the table for him. But anyway, so I hired a couple of my nephews. They lived over in the Jenison area. Great kids, and what was really amazing is they were bike riders. They actually raced bikes, and they would ride their bikes all the way from Jenison all the way to like 68th Street and Hannah Lake Road. That's where a lot of the houses I was doing at the time. They would ride that every day back and forth. I don't know how far that would be, but I would guess 30 miles. I don't know, maybe somebody has a better idea of geography than I, but They would ride all the way back and forth every day, come to work, and drive their bikes back home, and they did that all summer long. So pretty amazing. And they're both very successful young men right now. Not young, so much young anymore, but anyway. So that's one memory I have. So that's how I started my business. I became self-employed. Still lived in Greenville yet. Then got to know a builder in the Rockford area, so I went to work for him. And he was pretty much my exclusive supplier of work at the time, because he did, when I first went into business for myself, the housing industry was booming. There were houses, there was more than I could do. I had 2 or 3 employees, and I couldn't keep up. There were houses I had to turn down because it seems like I'd get one done and there'd be 2 ready for me to start. And it got to be where I was trying to work 6 days a week, sometimes 7. I always remember going in on a Sunday and working on a house, and there was an old gentleman came walking by. I think I was painting an outside front door or something. And he says hello, and he says, that door's not going to turn out right. I looked at him and said, what do you mean? What's wrong? He said, God's not going to let that. It's Sunday. He shouldn't be here doing this. And it really struck a chord with me that I was here working on a Sunday, the day of rest. And this, older man makes that statement to me that, I shouldn't be there doing that, that I should be with God on Sunday, not trying to satisfy somebody's schedule to get a job done. And so I still remember that. So anyway, things were good. Brenda was working, and she was working a lot of hours too. She used to work in Town and Country, and 60 hours a week was nothing for her. She'd be gone, and then they were on call on weekends, so she would have to go in sometimes with no notice. She had the pager on, and she'd get paged, and she'd have to run into the clinic. But we had lots of money. Money was never. I sold the house that I had, and we lived together in her little ranch house. And what?
I'm just going to move you forward to 2008.
Oh, yes. Then 2008 comes along, and let's see. We had Isabella first, and Brenda just had Nicholas. And I guess this is another turn in my life that I want to talk about. That 2008 comes along, and the mortgage crisis. All of a sudden, things went from more houses than I can do. All of a sudden, nobody's building anything. There's all these houses that people could get into before. Nobody could get a mortgage anymore. Nobody could go to a bank and I don't know what happened, but I just know there are a lot of builders that went out of business at that time, and the one I worked for was able to stay in, but he had nothing. I mean, we would maybe have one house a year or two, and so here's this business that I built upon all new construction. I never did it. People would ask me to do remodel work, and I would turn them down. I'd say, I don't have time, because I really wanted to do the new stuff. I've had you get a lot more satisfaction on working on new stuff that you create the best out of it that you can. There's not something that you're trying to cover over that somebody made a mistake in. That's what Redec's about. So I really enjoyed the new stuff. I had all the spray equipment that that we could use in new construction, and all of a sudden this is all gone. So suddenly there's no, I've got nowhere to go. I've got no income. I've got no jobs to go to, and at the same time, Brenda had a job situation where she wanted to spend more time at home because we had a new baby and Isabella, and they pretty much told her at Town and Country that we don't need a part-time veterinarian, we need a full-time. And I don't. She's sitting here. Otherwise, I would say more about it, but she probably doesn't want me to. She felt very unappreciated. They told her.
It's okay. It's not my story. It's yours.
I remember she came and
anyway,
she told me they said that
it's your story, not mine. Don't need to keep saying.
she tells
So we
them.
had our 2 children. Let's move this along. We had these 2 children.
Yes.
What was that like for you? How old were you, and what was it like to have your own kids?
Oh, well, Isabella, I mean, being there for a child to be born is an amazing thing. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you experienced that, but I remember I told the doctor, I said, I don't do blood wells, so I don't want to be in there. I said, I'll be in the room, but I don't want to watch. I don't want anything to do with it. And he was a character. I mean, he came for, Isabella was born in late December, so he comes in with a hat on with all these Christmas tree lights on it. And she was a difficult birth. I remember, Brenda was in labor for a long time. And finally, he says, "Come on, you got to stand here and watch this. You'll really appreciate it. You'll never regret doing this," he said. And the head would appear and then it would disappear again. And so he tells us, his nurse, he says, "Go get the Hoover." And I'm thinking, what is he talking about? She comes back in with this like suction cup thing, and he sticks it on there. When the head pokes out, he sticks it on, and out comes Isabella. And it was funny because her head was kind of cone-shaped because of the suction. And I looked at the nurse, I said, "That's going to go away, right?" She's not going to, I don't know if you guys remember Saturday Night Live and they had the cone heads. I'm thinking, I'm going to have this daughter that has this cone-shaped head all his life. But I guess they start massaging it right away and it goes away. But yeah, like I said, he had me cut the cord, and this is against anything that I wanted to do. And then he says, "Okay, now it's time for the Evo twin." And I'm thinking, they're not having twins. And so we pulled out this bloody mess, and I'm surprised I didn't end up on the ground because that would be me, But it's an amazing thing to hold your baby for the first, your daughter for the first time, and now to see her grow up into the great and wonderful adult she is. So anyway, back to the financial thing. So Brenda's decided that she couldn't work there anymore, so she comes home. I have no work, so we're, all of a sudden we still have a mortgage, and we still have bills to pay, because before that we had done, But I guess another thing, I trusted in God. If God wouldn't have been in my life at that time, the same thing probably would have happened that happened to me in my previous relationships. Things would have dissolved. But since we had God as a basis in our lives, we were able to overcome that. One of the first decisions we make is that we would not stop tithing at church. Even though we didn't have the money, we would still tithe. We would still give what we had when money was good, and all of a sudden, he finds her a job. She did relief work, which was really, really good. She would go in and take, if a doctor needed a day off and he had maybe it was a single practice or something, she would go in and work for him, and she did a good job at that. And I started, calling people I knew and say, I can read deck now if you want. So jobs started to come in for me, and so I kind of reinvented myself as far as the painting business. And the more people I started to work for, they would tell other people about me, and so I started getting all these phone calls. I remember once I did one house for a lady, and somehow she put me on Angie's list, and I came home one day and my machine was full of messages from people, because I got on this Angie list, and I didn't want to be on there because I had enough, but to try to answer and do something with all those phone calls. I mean, I'm talking 20 people or something. I can't do, So you'd spend, at first I started answering all these people back, calling them back and said, I really can't, but then I just started to ignore all the messages. Maybe it wasn't the right thing to do, but, so anyway, God was blessing us. We still tithe here, and I think he was the one that facilitated, us surviving through all the bad things that happened in the financial part. So
There's more about the kids that I think is kind of cool. Roger's wife before me was Viva, and she had the 3 children, Amanda, Jeremiah, and Des. It sounds like Amanda was kind of a character and the epitome of the teenage girl. She and her mother clashed a lot.
She was something special. She was a beautiful girl. I mean, I remember a couple of times when we would, I think Viva had some French Indian in her, so she was, they had the really dark hair and they had the bright blue eyes, and so I mean they were very. I remember when we would go out to eat. I remember especially one night we went out to eat together, and Amanda was probably 15. And we walked into like an Olive Garden restaurant or something like that, and all the guys in the place all turned their head to look at her. Me living with her every day, I didn't realize, I guess I got used to seeing her. But anyway, she was very beautiful and very noticeable, and she knew it. And she caused her a lot. She went to Greenville High School when we lived here, and got in trouble a lot of times, and so we had to ground her. And I just remember one time we had this big argument, and she said she was leaving, and I actually sat on her, and she was yelling at me, and I wouldn't let her leave the house because I didn't want her to go. But anyway, she, of course we separated because her mom and I got divorced. But she actually told me once, called me and says, I'm going in the Navy. I said, you're what? I said, you won't survive in there. You have no self-control. You have no discipline. I mean, I know teenage daughters already now for messy rooms, but you couldn't even walk in her room. She would throw clothes all over the place, and I'm kind of a neat person, so I would say, you got to clean it. How can you live like this, So I'm thinking, here, this girl's going in the Navy. She's going to, doesn't she know what it's like? And make a long story short, she became very, very good at it. She's still in yet. She's traveled all over the world. She was stationed in Hawaii for a while, and what's the other one? Diego
Garcia. But what
Diego
did she
Garcia.
say to you? What did she say to you?
What's that?
What did she say to you?
She told me once, in a phone call later after this, that she'll always love me and be thankful for that I was so hard on her, because if I hadn't have done that, if I wouldn't have tried to discipline her and stop her, she would have probably got in more trouble than she could handle. And she said, she'll always be thankful for that, which was really, really felt good to me, because it's hard to do. It's hard, when a child that's really not yours, and you're trying, that even though you love them very much, to try to, put them on the path they need to go, it's hard to do.
And that's what she had said to you, was, you love me so much that you would do that for me.
Yeah. So now I'm retired. I haven't worked for 3 or 4 years now. It was hard to retire. I really enjoyed what I would do, but my back started to give me issues, and being on a ladder all day long, which you have to do, because pretty good at supervision, but I'm more of a hands-on person. I like to do things on my, like sometimes when I had the guys, that I was working for me go home, I would spend an extra hour or two going back to detail the stuff they had done, because it didn't quite meet up to my expectations. I wouldn't tell them about it, because in most cases, most people thought it was good enough, but it wasn't good enough for me. So I would go back and spend an extra hour or two at work just going over making sure that it met my expectations.
And that adds up.
What's that?
That adds up over time.
Yeah, so...
so what would you say to, what's your advice now for people who are just starting out working?
Yeah, for a young guy, there's not too many. There's a few of us in here, but it seems like, looking back, I spent a lot of my time working, trying to make money, trying to buy things, and as you got now that I'm older and I got the time to do it, there's things I can't physically do anymore that I wish I would have done earlier. Arthritis in my back, don't have the stamina I used to have, and you get to this age and you have the time, you have the opportunity to do these things, but you can't do them all because your body physically won't let you. So for any young men that happen to be watching this, don't work so much. Enjoy life. Take the day off when you need it, and don't spend it all trying to gain things that this world can give you. You don't need the next best car. You don't need the fancy house. You don't need the best iPhone you can buy for thousands of dollars.
So what is your overall? What's your overall for what you want to say? What are your take-home messages from your life?
Well, just to let God always lead you. I just think that don't give up on God like I gave up on Him. Like I said, when He let I thought He let my father die. I truly believed He could save him. That He was all powerful. If He wanted to heal him and get rid of this cancer, that it was nothing He couldn't do. So when He didn't do that, when He didn't answer my prayer, I gave up on Him. And life is tough without God. You can't live it without God, because if you do, you're running in circles. You're turning around, turn, and you never know where to stop. And you need His guidance, because without Him, life is a mess. You need somebody to talk to answer your prayers, to believe in, to understand that there's more than just what we have here. That someday, that when it's my time to go, that He'll be there for me on that day, and that He actually loves me. For a while, I thought He didn't love me. So after 70 years, I finally found out. It hasn't been 70 years, but I never would have thought. When I was younger, I never would have thought 70 would come, and it's here. And if He blesses me with more, I will be happy. But what's that? Want me to read that? Okay. Certain situations are not meant to test us, but instead to hone us until we are what He wants us to be. Even though I don't like it, and it doesn't always feel good, it's part of the plan. We're not big enough to have knowledge that encompasses all. We want all the answers, but we only get to know a little bit, and only one season at a time. So that's a statement that I think that, I don't know when I wrote this down there, but but thank you for listening to. That's my story. I hope it was something that you understand, and now you know more about me than I want you to know. So thank you for listening.